Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a SOCA researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Simon Chow. I'm based out of Los Angeles, California. And I'm a higher ed professional, former higher ed professional, now soon to be researcher at UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Sciences. Incoming PhD candidate, so very excited for that. Otherwise, I love basketball, huge Laker fan, Angel City fan as well. And I'm happy to just, be here, talk with my friend Scott about higher ed.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simon, for joining me on the podcast. I'm really excited to learn more about your story because I feel that, your research interests, right, what you're pursuing with your PhD at UCLA, is very much aligned with your own lived experiences, and which makes it all the more powerful. I'm really happy that we can have this space to learn more about your journey. So just wanted to pass it back to you and ask you, what were some of the milestones of your own educator journey?
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for asking. So in terms of milestones, I guess my first big one was just getting into college. I'm a first gen college student. Neither of my parents went to college abroad or here in the US. They're both immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself. Grew up in LA, Chinatown, LA specifically. So pretty much an inner city kid applying to college for the first time, first in my family to do so. And I think tracing back to like the beginning of that journey, like I was part of this group called College Match LA, and they provided a lot of counseling and support during this time. So there were SAT classes, essay workshops, and also counselors that were assigned to like help us understand the college process. And I think it was just like such a huge kind of first step in this journey leading up to where I'm at now. And it's great because that program introduced me to a lot of like these small liberal arts private universities and colleges in the East Coast. So growing up, LA, Chinatown, it's like all the UCs, UCLA, UC Berkeley, all the Ivy Leagues, and those are like the main schools that the parents and the community talks about. So I think for me, it was just kind of like, I saw myself and everybody else in this community going towards a certain path. And with College Match LA, they introduced a very different path of like, okay, you could actually go to these like, small liberal arts colleges where there's more of a focus on undergraduate experiences and also just, quite frankly, better financial aid packages and grants, or, these are real small schools with huge endowments and, very robust financial aid and scholarship programs. So I think the directors and the founders of this program. So the founder his name is Harley Frankel. Really, a very inspirational man in this journey. And he and the counselors and also Erica Rosales, who's currently the director, they kind of create this really cool program where they introduce us to all these different possibilities, and also in a way let us know that when you apply to college that you kind of deserve to be there, because we were all already recruited based on our outstanding grades, involvement, extracurriculars, et cetera, and also based on our testing as well. So there's been kind of this kind of pre-admissions and admissions work, so to speak, or the screening that's already happened. And I think what was really cool is that they kind of imbued this belief that like, oh yeah, sure, you're from the inner city, you're an immigrant or you're a kid immigrant, you're first gen, but you're also high need. But when you get to these schools, like, you're just as kind of worthy of being there. So a sense of belonging and a belief in myself and also other folks who identify with this, first generation identity. That was kind of a big pillar in my journey. So I'm eternally grateful for them. They introduced me to schools in the East Coast. So I learned a lot about these different schools. And the one that stood out was Bowdoin College, which is where I ended up going. It's crazy talking about this because I remember explaining to my very Chinese tiger mom about this, and she was like, how do you say this name? Like, everybody struggles to say it because it's such an interesting spelling. Bowdin, Bowdoin. Um, but I think what my mother was confused about was, one, what is this school? Where is it? It's located in Brunswick, Maine. And lastly, like, can I brag to my friends about this school? Can I brag to so and so in the neighborhood, or your aunts and aunties and uncles in China about what school you're going to? And the answer to that was no. Uh, but I think what drew me to a school like Bowdoin was that it was such like a small, close knit community, and I felt like in these small liberal arts schools, you actually get to really engage with professors. I learned that really quickly during the tour. I was like, oh wow, like, people here like really know each other, and the professors seem like they're not just busy hidden away doing some obscure research. You're actually like around on campus. They're talking to you. They're inviting students to the research. So I think to me, as someone who really valued wanting to learn, like actually learn for the sake of learning, I think that was just a really nice, robust, and kind of inclusive environment I felt from that kind of from the academic side of things. So yeah, that was my first journey going to Bowdoin College. And when I was there, I worked at the admissions office as well. So I think it was really cool because the admission counselor who like basically recruited me, or came by my high school and talked to me and my friends. She ended up working. She continued working at the admissions office, and then I worked as a summer intern. So I would see her around, and she's now the VP of admissions and financial aid at Bowdoin. So it was just great also seeing her journey. Kind of like through the years. And fun fact, so her name's Claudia. She's great. She's amazing. She and I both did our graduate degrees around the same time when we were at Hugsy. So it was really cool seeing her there at graduation. But she was more like kind of like in this. It was like around 2022, so it's like hybrid, and like I felt like it was just hard to see people on campus, but just knowing that like this person who like basically advocated for me to go to college is now like also doing this master's degree, and we're kind of like in this together, trying to figure out ways to again help more first gen low income students of color into college. So it was so many full circle moments.
Wow, thank you so much, Simon. I find that this journey of yours and your family's right wider community in Chinatown, LA area. It's one in which, like, of course, you had to work very, very hard, but it sounds like there were these support structures, right? These organizations like College Match LA that were there to really show you new pathways, right? And open up your mind to not just like what is out there, but also what is the meaning of getting an undergraduate degree to go to college. What does it mean to really learn and find community, right? To find that fit within the college space. And I love that you were exposed to these small liberal art colleges, on the East Coast or just across the U.S. because I actually went to a small liberal arts college myself, and I can attest to everything that you just shared about how it really allowed you to like connect and engage with professors, gave you a sense of community, learning for the sake of learning. All of that, I think, really helps one to understand what their real passion or their passions are, and have the confidence that why not you to continue to pursue that and contribute towards those bodies of knowledge as well as the communities with which that knowledge serves for them. And I think it's it's never any coincidence, right, where you end up in terms of like going to Bowdoin College, and then from there to Hugsy, to Harvard. But there's so much about your journey that is so fascinating, and I wanted to follow up on maybe a more personal note, because I know, like, being that you're a first gen college student, and you're talking about how both your parents were immigrants. Could you speak a little bit more about what that journey was like for them in terms of like their decisions to come to California, and what was it initially like, kind of just getting set up, here, because there was this kind of transplant, right? From one culture with a different language to a
Mhm.
completely new one. So what was that like for your like what were some of the decisions your parents had to make in order to do this? And then also what was it like for you as like a recent transplant to adapt to a very different cultural milieu?
Yeah, yeah. A huge common theme within my journey is migration. I think migration both for my family from China to the US and then from me from LA to Brunswick, Maine. And just to kind of like, take it back to the beginning. So my family, we're from southern China. We're from Toisan. So Toisan is, a small little village in China, but there's been a huge history of immigration of Toisanese folks into the U.S. for a long time. If you watch Sinners, so in Sinners, there's the Chow family, Grace and Bo Chow. They're from Toisan, and I know because watching that movie when Remick, spoilers, sorry, but when Remick was speaking their Chinese dialect, I was like, I know that dialect, he's speaking my language. So yeah, there's been a huge history of, folks from Toisan to the US, so for a long time. But I was born in Toisan, grew up there for about 3 or 4 years, and we migrated to the US in like the early 2000s. And the primary purpose or the primary reasons was to find a better life. I think back then Toisan was more like kind of like working class. There weren't the greatest opportunities for like social mobility and whatnot. And as we know, coming to the U.S., the American dream, to work hard, save money, make it out here. So that's why that's why the family immigrated. But yeah, we migrated from Toisan all the way to Los Angeles, in Chinatown, at this place called Chungking Road. And I remember distinctly leaving the airport, getting into that parking lot in that taxi and getting off and looking at this place and going like, wow, like, this is the new life now. Like we're here now. And I think I didn't really understand it as a kid, but I think I realized like, oh shoot, like the next day my friends aren't here and I'm not going to this school anymore. I'm like doing something else. So that was kind of like a big moment. Also, quick side fun fact. So Chungking Road is where Everything Everywhere All at Once was also filmed. And this is going to be another common theme, like the city of LA, and also just all these connections with like movies and storytelling. So there's a scene in Everything Everywhere All at Once where I think it was Wayman and Michelle Yeoh's character. They had just moved to the U.S. and they're going to start their laundromat business, and I think it was like the younger versions of them, like the de-aged versions of them coming in, and literally where they got off the car was also the same place where I got off the car, like going into Chunky Road. And they were filmed in this alleyway, and I was like, I recognize that alleyway like the back of my hand. Cause there's these apartments, but behind these apartments, there's like these Chinese restaurants. And you have the chefs out there smoking cigarettes, squatting down in between breaks. So that visual imagery, watching that movie and also just kind of reflecting on my own was just really crazy because it's so real in the like Asian American kind of diaspora and like move of like wanting a better life here and like trying to achieve that dream. But anyways, I digress. Chungking Road, grew up there. And I think what's really cool is that Chinatown is a very kind of like I see it as somewhat of like a bridge town because, you know, people when I remember as a kid looking around, I was like, oh, like people still look like me for the most part because Chinatown, full of Chinese people. And I didn't really leave Chinatown much as a kid. I mean, I was a young kid, and we just went to school, went home, and hung out in the neighborhood. So, but I think as I grew older and I spent more time just exploring, hanging out, like obviously in the city of LA, you see folks from different backgrounds coming into Chinatown, in and out. So it was just like I think growing up in Chinatown eased the transition from like China to America, to LA more specifically. And I think that was just such like a fascinating experience because to me, looking back, it felt seamless. Like grew up with a bunch of, only Chinese people in China in our region, going to Chinatown, seeing still a lot of Chinese people, but also a little different people too. And then eventually making my way to the East Coast where in Maine, the state population is like 95, 97% white. So the migration of my body and like the different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and also the history and the stories that connected it all too. So that was kind of like the beginning of it.
And then you went off to Harvard, and that's a very international student body as well. So it just seems
Yeah.
like there's these. Well, how can I frame this? Because I mean, in a way, like when you're younger, right? It probably was really fortunate to have had that kind of like community, Chinese American community, to kind of like
Mhm.
cushion right the blow of like culture shock.
Mhm.
But at the same time, right, uprooting yourself and having to create a brand new uh, friend group
Yeah.
is always quite daunting. And then
Oh yeah.
as you continue to form your sense of identity, right, anchored in community, and
Mhm.
then going off to the East Coast, and then finally finding a very different community, I would imagine that also like it presented a challenge but
Mhm.
also an opportunity to really
Mhm.
share your culture, right? From Chinatown and your story of,
Mhm.
being an immigrant from China. Like, what was that kind of like? And were you in a kind of like mind space entering into that community of wanting to share that? Because sometimes, I can imagine you're just like, hey, I just want to study like psychology, or I want to take this one course in economics, but now you're asking me about my background out of
Yeah.
kind of wherever their sense of fascination is coming from. Did
Yeah.
you lean into that as an opportunity, or did you see it as more of like a kind of like a challenge of like trying to make sense of your story and then repackage it for a very different kind of person? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that question is kind of like a central question in a lot of the research and the classes I took too when I was at Bowdoin. So, grew up in Chinatown, spent my time there, and then I went to Bowdoin. And, Bowdoin it's undeniably a really good school. I think they do a really good job with education and like, providing resources and just also just connections and whatnot. But it is very different. I I kind of joke sometimes, I was truly a fish out of water, so to speak. My Chinese mom jokes about, oh, you just want to get as far away as possible from like, from me. And I'm like, no, mother, it's a great school. I'll come home during the break. So I love you. Um, but I think it is very different. I think um, Bowdoin was the first time I was introduced to so much wealth and whiteness. And those two very much intertwined in those spaces. I mean, Bowdoin is a PWI, it's a predominantly white institution. It's in Maine, and it's a very old school with a lot of deep connections and history to the New England area, also historically white. So I noticed it when I visited as a high schooler, but I just kind of didn't think too much about it because I was more in the headspace of like, sure, there's, white people here, but I've interacted with white folks before. I've grown up with them. I, you know, have many white teachers and counselors and, some friends during summer camps and basketball and whatnot. So it wasn't like a big thing for me, but it wasn't until I was like living there that I was kind of like experiencing like, oh, like it really stands out. In a more like subtle ways. I think this is kind of like where the academic side of the research really came in. Like I remember, so this leads to why I took um, education and sociology as my majors, because I remember going around campus and feeling really like out of place and like, like, do I really belong here? Like I know like, on paper that yes, I earned the grades, I earned the admissions to this place. And my counselors and all my friends like, yeah, like you worked your ass off and you deserve to be at a place like this. But there was still just kind of like this little like I don't feel that kind of the belonging as much as I did back home. And there's obvious answers to that. Like I miss ethnic food that I grew up with. I miss all the Chinese home cooking. I miss, seeing, I miss the LA tacos. I miss the music that we hear just kind of hanging around. I Bowdoin, Brunswick, it gets real quiet sometimes. It's, out there. Um, it gets real quiet. There's also a lot of just kind of this, you have to be on in a way where you're like, Bowdoin student. You're a smart intellectual, preppy kid at this private school. So I, coming from an inner city public school, I was just kind of like, oh, this is very different. And I think the environment and like the vibe of the place really kind of start to permeate a little bit more and more into like my consciousness. But yeah, I felt that for a while, and I think it was like the first month or so was like pretty tough. That the culture shock and just the difference. But I think I started I started taking education classes, and I think I remember just kind of like learning about the history of education in the U.S. and also about these um, predominantly white institutions and how like historically they cater to a certain audience, white male, from a wealthy background from the Northeast. So it kind of brought a lot more sense into this feeling that I had. And I was like, oh yeah, of course, like, now I know, like, I don't feel truly belong here because this place was not made originally for people who looked like me or who came from my background necessarily. So I think that was just kind of like, just seeing how education and education studies in itself really gave me the tools to help articulate exactly, and also to help, position myself with where I am at. And I think that's also where sociology came in, because a big tenet in sociology is, the sociological imagination, which is the understanding of the self within society, the differences between the two and the connections between the two. So I kind of developed this idea of like, oh yeah, I'm first gen, low income, inner city student, like, those all are check marks that aren't tied to like the historical population of a place like Bowdoin. So yes, this really makes sense. But then after that, it's kind of like, now that I know this, the so what? I think the so what was kind of like tied into like more of the lived experiences. It's like, okay, like as first gen student, like I feel out of place. Now what do I do about that? Like, do I just kind of like acknowledge it intellectually and then all of a sudden like, everything's okay? Or do I, learn to build what kind of kept me going when I was back home? Like, how do I recreate community here? Like I mentioned earlier, I miss ethnic food. Like, how do we go about bringing that here on campus? And just find different ways to just kind of find each other, in terms of just other folks who feel the same, or also, pieces of ourselves that we realize that really matter a lot more, that was just kind of like taken for granted in our everyday life. So yeah, that difference in experience really shaped my academic and educational journey as well.
Thank you for sharing that. It's fascinating because what you said about being at a college like Bowdoin that is a, what is it, primarily white institution?
Predominantly white institution.
Yes, predominantly white institution, and that
Mhm.
there's this understanding, right, from its history that it was made with an explicit demographic, and that doesn't match, right, your
Yeah.
background, and yet here you are, like, well, at that time taking classes there,
Mhm.
and one of the things that you said that you enjoyed most about your experience at that college was this sense of belonging, right?
Mhm.
Being able to connect with the people there, the professors, and so it was less, this kind of like emphasis on the racial component when you speak just broadly to it. But then now you're articulating like more of the nuance of like, no, 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 definitely race came into play. But then you were speaking about these concrete actions of like, okay, well, how can I create more belonging? How can I create more community? How can I share that with others, or how can I find link up with others that have that appreciation or have a similar background? And I think that's really powerful, right? It comes from a place of empowerment, a sense of wanting to create something new, right? Adding to a culture that has a very long-standing history. Um, I'm curious because you were there for your studies, you were taking courses in sociology and having your own kind of reflections on your like racial and ethnic identity. So when it comes to, I guess, the more like professional lens, or the academic lens as well, but like how is it that you felt like you were able to like channel your energies towards building something in that realm of belonging, um even though, like, again, it was like the foundations of that place were very much set? Like, how do you just build atop that? Is that the way with which you can address it, or I mean, is there something more radical in terms of starting new? I mean, I'm curious, like, what's your kind of, what were your initial thoughts on that? And then how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question because I think that's also a very huge tension, not just like, at Bowdoin, but I think at like many of these schools, like in the US. At the time as a freshman, I was still trying to like learn and figure stuff out. So I did join the Student Center for Multicultural Life as an intern. So I think that was a really great opportunity to kind of work, you know, within student affairs to help create the sense of belonging that I mentioned earlier. I worked for Benjamin Harris, great guy, and also met other folks on campus who are kind of invested in create a sense of belonging because that center was like the umbrella organization for all the affinity groups on campus. So, first gen groups, the Asian American Association, um, Black Student Union or the African American Society, as it's called at Bowdoin, and the LASO group with the Latin American Student Association. So that was just like a great way of kind of meeting everyone else on campus. I think what it is at PWIs is that like all the people of color find each other. Eventually we stick out like sore thumbs and we kind of see the upperclassmen. We just kind of all right, like the little Spider-Man meme. You know what I'm saying? Like you just kind of point at each other like, hey, like we're here. Um, I think that was kind of like a good starting point, just finding each other through that. I think two, the classes I took was a great way of meeting other people who felt the same way. And I think what I kind of did was I was really, vocal and I participated a lot in the classroom, shared a lot of my thoughts. Not, sometimes I, sometimes I'm just kind of like, um, you know, what will a person of color think about this kind of thinking or like whatnot? And I think when you kind of show yourself and share your thoughts, you find other people who kind of like, probably feel the same way, but not necessarily share it in the classroom or, maybe at that time they didn't share it. So, but after class, you find each other during these events, you find each other. And then you just kind of, from there, you form these social groups and connections, and then you kind of like build from there. So I think that was a really great way of meeting different people. And also the Multicultural Center had its own funding and a lot of me and my colleagues, when we worked there, we found ways to kind of use that money to like create more events, like are there any conferences or retreats nearby other schools at this schools that we could create to kind of find each other and create this sense of community? People who want to self-identify themselves. Oh, like I remember the first it was a first gen like student of color retreat my freshman year, and that was when I met like a lot of my close friends throughout the 4 years I was there. And I think it was great because we found each other and then we had these like kind of breakout events. We talked about our experiences, we shared it, we bonded it. And then we just kind of like found like other people who felt that maybe like in this general space, we don't necessarily belong, but like with each other that we definitely belong in this space. So, shout out to the Multicultural Center. Love my time there. Some of the projects and events that I kind of, co-led, one of them was I made all this food that I miss from home. So I talk about food a lot, being a true LA foodie guy. I remember I did two things. I made my best take on the LA street tacos with whatever ingredients I could find in Maine. And I also made just like a very comforting classic like chicken noodle soup that my mom used to make me. So those were the two things I made, and I created like an event. I kind of just was like, Benjamin was asking me, oh, so what's the purpose of this? To bring a piece of home here, but, there's a part of me that's like, I just want you to pay for this food I'm going to make that I missed from home for other people who will truly appreciate it while there's a movie going on in the background. But it was just like it was a very rewarding experience because I spent hours like just kind of experimenting with these different marinades for these tacos, and I was kind of like, it's not right. I got to get it right, Like I don't want to like bring this, be like, oh, the tacos here aren't that good, and then like show up with like not good LA style street tacos. So I did a lot of research. I did a lot of field research when I was back home during break, trying these different things, asking a lot of questions. And I made one, and I remember kind of like, oh yes, like this is the taste profile I'm looking for. And I invited my other friend who was also from LA, and I was kind of like, try these tacos. Let me know if And she's like, oh yeah, these are pretty good. So that was something that I really kind of like was very tangible and very meaningful that I felt like, left a mark in my psyche. But I think a lot of what I've also learned on the flip side is that, to your earlier question about like, do you build on top of it? Do you do something radical? I think what I started off with like a building on top of it. So, okay, there's this pre-existing structure and experience or organizations and funding. And then, there's this little center I'm a part of, and like how do we kind of like bring that out? And there's definitely pockets and moments where it's like really nice and really heartwarming. But I think as I spend more time there, and also as I kind of like talk to like my friends and colleagues, I'm like, there's so much more out of our control and so much more systemically and big wise that like it's hard to kind of you know you you can't completely kind of I can't have this one, in 4 years, I'm not going to undo or overwrite, 400 years of history at this school. Like, no way. So obviously that stuff in the past and also just the structures and the practices kind of like leak through. So there's definitely, been some tough conversations to be had. There's a big little division. I remember my first year where they had like, there was like a cultural appropriation party. And there was just kind of this huge like divide on campus about like, white students wearing people of color costumes, like using their culture as a costume. And then that blew up. The way it blew up too was kind of like, crazy too. So I remember like my first semester, I was like, oh wow, like I'm starting to get the hang of this college thing. I'm starting to find my sense of belonging. And then boom, this happened. And it kind of set the tone for like the next 4 years of like, the vibe and like the racial tensions kind of bubbling underneath, so to speak.
Wow. Well, just want to say now I really want to try the LA taco like
Oh
that
yes.
you make. I want to
Yeah.
try it, man.
I
And
got some spice here.
okay, yeah, no, when we meet up again in LA, I'm definitely
Yeah.
gonna ask for that. I'm gonna request a couple tacos, and I wanted to comment about that because I find the that point about like sharing one's culture through food to be really important because
Hmm.
everyone's got to eat, and even if taste buds are different, I think undeniably the preparation that you did, right, research, trying to figure out the best marinade, just investing that time because you care about
Hmm.
your culture and you care about what other people will think of it, right? In terms of what their experience is, like just really trying to set them up for the most positive experience. Really, I think touches people's heart. Like even if they eat the taco and they're like, it's not really for me, they
Hmm.
still can say, wow, like, but I appreciate you for putting in this effort and
Yeah.
and maybe they ask additional questions about it and maybe they share more about like, well, if it is not something that they like, right? Maybe it's too spicy, right? Just making an example, and then it's like, why? So, what kind of food do you eat, right? There's an explanation for all of these things in terms of what we're exposed to or not. But
Hmm.
if you don't bridge that divide through dialogue, right, through some kind of conversation, you won't know. And actually,
Hmm.
that's kind of the theme that I was picking up with
Hmm.
the activities out of the center, with your own personal initiatives, with these kinds of events, and also just like kind of spontaneous one-to-one, just kind of meetups and talking with different people and getting connected, like, just regular social mingling that you see at college campuses, is that you need to just have dialogue and talk about it. And sometimes that can be really uncomfortable, like with the kind of racial, blow up of the, appropriation, cultural appropriation thing that, yeah, it brings up a lot of questions and it gets people very defensive. And sometimes it's seemingly insurmountable. And
Hmm.
yet still got to talk about it, right? It's that elephant in the room kind of thing. And so, yeah, I just, wanted to kind of identify that and then now kind of thinking about from that context in Bowdoin, you later went on and found yourself in another academic environment, Harvard, and now there's still the racial kind of component of like people from various different walks of life, minority groups, right, first gen as well, including your own background, but now there's like a lot of international students, and so I'm wondering, like that kind of added another dimension to it. And what was that like now interacting with people from maybe like far away countries that you've never visited yourself. And
Yeah.
was it, yeah, of a similar kind of intention of like trying to create a new sense of belonging? How did
Yeah.
you evolve in your own sense of identity?
Yeah.
Having been, born in China, but then grew up in LA, but then studied on the East Coast. Like, yeah, it feels like this was like another big step in your evolution.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think the exposure to like a very different and more international community actually started at Bowdoin, because I remember at Bowdoin was where I met like a lot of Chinese nationals. And kind of like trying to connect, and also like seeing them too, like, hey, like, 我也是中国人, what I'm saying? Like trying to speak my best Mandarin, or, if they're from Hong Kong, speak a little Cantonese. And sometimes you laugh like, ha ha ha, like, oh, okay. But I think what was fascinating was like, there were moments where I looked at them like, yes, we're both Chinese, but like our lived experiences are so different. Cause and then when I went to Harvard, well, I was like, oh, there's a lot of international, there's way more international people here. And I think that was fascinating because in the international space, as to be able to go to a U.S. institution as an international student, you either have to have, a really great scholarship, or you come from a lot of money, because you're paying that out of state international tuition. So I think a lot of the folks, a number of the folks were very wealthy as well. I think some of these Chinese international students, I was kind of looking at them, I was like, on paper, we're both Chinese, and we there's a shared language and some culture connections there as well. But I also saw how we were different, because that's when I realized, I was like, damn, like I'm really from LA, like, I mean, like, do you hear Chinese nationals talking about tacos, the love of tacos, like I do. So the connection there, so there were connections, because like it's also funny because a lot of them are huge Laker fans, and I'm like, ah, yes, I am a Laker fan. So there's that kind of global connection from a local perspective there too. So there were connections, but there were also kind of disconnections as well. And I think the wealth and the class part was like a huge part of it. And I was kind of like, oh, like, we move about this space differently because of this money and this wealth that is like, very different. And I remember kind of, I remember like being invited to some events and some vacations. I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna go to Greece during spring break because I can't afford that ticket, and I can't afford to spend all that money. But thank you for the invite. You know what I'm saying? So it's just kind of seeing that, and also understanding that there's a whole different world, international sphere, that I didn't was kind of like privy to, but didn't necessarily engage with until I got to Harvard, because Harvard truly is a very international space. But met a lot of great people, a lot of fascinating stories, and how people got there. And I think at the end of the day, what was really compelling to me was that, like, we're all really here just to do something bigger than ourselves. Whether or not you come from a certain background or not, I think that's the beauty of like going to like a school of education, is that like inherently you want to do something with the school, or like with the next generation, with like a bigger group too. So it's always very much, you're bonded by this shared common mission, so to speak. But yeah, folks are real different, and I know I'm different too. So I think that was kind of like acknowledging that kind of difference, and then learning how to connect after that.
No, that's so fascinating, right? You had this experience at Bowdoin initially with meeting these Chinese nationals, and kind of, it sounds like this initial excitement of like, oh, like I wonder how we can like find common ground, and perhaps maybe there was assumptions of like, of course we'll like, connect easier because, I see you, right? And in terms of like, oh, we look similar and like we speak same language. And yet discovering, oh, there's also a lot of differences. And then kind of understanding like how that lands in terms of
Yeah.
like how you want to move forward with it as just like a friendship. Because I also think college is really a great training ground for like how to do friendship.
Mhm.
And that, it's not to say that like if their background is so different because of like wealth and status and where they came from, that you can't be friends. But I also think that it's just yeah, it again just raises a lot of interesting questions about that. But I think what you were articulating with like your time at Harvard and understanding that people, yeah, come from such different backgrounds, but being that they want to make some kind of change in the world, they want to contribute to education, they see the long-term project of education for like future generations is very important.
Mhm.
That that sense of purpose, I think, is really important. And I feel like ties into this broader theme of global citizenship that I always like to ask my guests what their thoughts are, because again, it sounds like, we kind of started from the local, finding your way to a very international place like Harvard. Like, would you say that your experience interacting with these international students or just people in that community as like one that you felt like, wow, like these are global citizens? And like, is there something like from, I don't know, Hugsy that they kind of expressly stated this is what we mean by a global citizen? Or was that something that you just kind of had to make sense of and articulate yourself through the interactions you had with the student body?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's I mean, this kind of goes deep into maybe linguistics a little bit, because I think there was kind of like internally like me trying to figure out like global citizen, like what does that mean to me specifically, and that that's how I learn and like develop meaning in things. So I think I come from a very immigrant heavy community and background, so that was kind of like my perception and understanding of it. It's like, yes, we're all citizens of this country and we all come from a different place globally. So that was like, maybe not the most you know, accurate term for like what the more mainstream conversation was talking about at the school, but it was just how like how I conceptualized it, because we all come from somewhere. But I think I remember at my time at Hugsy first introduced to like the term third culture kid, and I was kind of like, oh wow, like this makes a lot of sense. And I think for those listening, third culture kid, from my understanding as like a local kid, is someone who uh, kind of like attends international schools in these different countries, and they might not be the same ethnic background as the dominant ethnic group in a certain country, and they just kind of go to these different international schools and they travel abroad a lot, and they kind of like exist in this space. Usually some folks call it very expat kind of space, where they kind of know each other from all these private schools, international boarding schools, or just kind of like activities, events, competitions in high schools that like bring them all together. So I think learning about that was really fascinating, because I was like, huh, like because I was not part of this group, obviously, but I think in observing how also like in a way like people from the other side of this kind of migration spectrum and how they navigate the world, I was like really fascinated, because I felt like they were leading a very different, but still kind of similar journey as someone like me from a very different background. And this is what I mean by that, because I grew up in LA. First gen student, I went to school in the East Coast, and then went to Hugsy, and uh, when I was at Bowdoin, they kind of joked that it's like, Camp Bobo, or like boarding school part two. So that would, me going from inner city LA to Bowdoin was kind of like my first introduction to that private school boarding experience that a lot of these international students also experience, but from like, from a high school side where they've already been kind of in this pipeline, so to speak. And then they're in these pockets where they see like each other, in these different events and organizations. And I see that on my end too. So for example, there's an event during my undergrad years called IVG, which is like, basically a conference for first gen folks who attend Ivy League schools, or the smaller NESCAC schools as well. And it's like for this community to find each other at this conference. And, I remember visiting different areas in the Northeast and like seeing some friends from high school, some friends I know from College Match LA who are attending these other, um, East Coast schools. So it's like kind of like a network, a social network of folks just finding each other through this shared mission and this shared journey, really. And so when I talk to some of these folks with a third culture kid background, I'm kind of like, oh wow, like I see how like I wasn't in Singapore going to boarding school and like going on these like trips in Europe or whatnot, but I feel like I understand this kind of like never truly belonging in like a certain space, and seeing like a dominant culture And also just finding your own little pocket of people that exist beyond just like, that one place on campus. It like also exists in these other events and organizations. So it was just fascinating. I think what also helped me understand that was this idea of social and cultural capital. This became kind of like, this is something I learned in sociology. Pierre Bourdieu, huge, kind of like a French sociologist who talked about this, basically how folks carry a certain kind of, when they have social capital, they have certain connections that either, bring more resources into their lives or more opportunities, and they kind of like develop this social network, so to speak. Whereas on the other side, you also have cultural capital, which is people from these certain pockets of society. They share this kind of behavior and understanding and references to our culture and things where they kind of identify each other that way. And strangely enough, I felt like, as different as my social and cultural capital were from these third culture kids, there were also a lot of parallelisms as well, like finding ways to help one another, but from very different socioeconomic backgrounds.
I really appreciate you kind of creating this parallel structure to like what you experienced going to Bowdoin, almost like as if that was a study abroad itself. And then these like, students, third culture students in high schools doing boarding school or finding themselves kind of posted up at different parts of the world. That in a sense, you were learning how to navigate a very different environment and
Mhm.
having to like almost like forced into finding your people, right? Like that, I think when you go to a new place, there's so much new that's kind of stimulating you that you're trying to kind of grasp for what is
Mhm.
familiar to anchor yourself. Because I think, we need some kind of stability, right? We can't just be in free fall all the time, right? Because there's always
Mhm.
that anxiety of like, when will I hit the ground? And
Mhm.
and then that's not a good feeling. So yeah, navigating, but like what comes with that is like this understanding that you got to put yourself out there, you got to talk to people that are different. Sometimes you'll quickly realize that your worldview is not shared by that other person, and then you negotiate it, right? You kind of back down, you lean forward. There's so many different things, but through that experience, what you're doing is like creating social and cultural capital, right? I think that those experiences are never wasted, and it allows us to have a deeper appreciation for how people form, right, their identities, and
Mhm.
how we can get really curious about what people are doing in their work, so that because that informs who they're still becoming, right? We're all kind of unfinished in that sense that we're life is lifing if we're figuring out what's the next step. But I think there's something about kind of really putting that at the forefront of like how you engage with others, that people feel that, and it can come across as a sense of like respect for like, oh wow, like you really want to understand, right? You're
Mhm.
not kind of creating this sense of like, oh, you're so othered and outsider that I just want to like, you know like, I don't know, not even get close or not engage in that deeper way. Cause then I think that's where like the respect comes into play. But it's clear that you were kind of, experiencing that, and then building those kind of like skill sets in a similar way. Cause I think, at least for me, the global citizenship identity side of it is meant to be one that is like unfinished. It's meant to be expansive. It's meant to invite those kinds of dialogues with people that, yeah, maybe you don't quite see eye to eye with, but that's okay. Because again, they're like, we don't know what's going on on their end, so the only way is to like initiate and engage and have that conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think, you know, I I like to think of myself as a very curious person. I love learning about people and things, and I think sociology is a great way of kind of like channeling that energy. Um, but yeah, I think the more you meet people, the more you learn about yourself, and the more of yourself that you meet through other people and also through experiences, you just kind of like get a little bit more like empathy and understanding. I think like a huge part of me is that like during my um, academic career was learning how to navigate that. Meeting people who come from similar backgrounds but have very different perspectives and takes on life, and then also meet people with very different backgrounds who actually share a lot of values and whatnot. So I think that was something that I had to kind of renegotiate with myself a lot during this journey. And I think also just, being so far away from home, like trying to, I get like, to your point, like trying to hold on to like the pieces of me that I felt like, um, I wanted to keep around. Because a huge question I was kind of like, like circulating in my mind and the mind of my friends is kind of like, without the community that like made you who you are, like who are you really? When you're a fish out of water, you're a different kind of water, different kind of environment. Like how do you adapt? How do you navigate this new life? How do you, maintain a sense of self while also understanding that there's things to be negotiated with this new place that you're in. So a lot of big questions on that. And reminds me of like a funny memory I had with this one friend. She's from the Bronx in New York, also first gen, low income background. I remember like we were just kind of like passing each other in student union, and she's like, Simon, like I don't know why, but I feel the need to like, you know, be extra ghetto when I'm here at this school, because I feel like if I don't like tap into it, I'll like lose that, if I'm like not like training that muscle. So I don't know, it's interesting stuff. And I was kind of like fascinating. Like that is absolutely true because I relate to, not that, I have the same background as hers or like, to her term of ghetto, but I felt like there's definitely parts of me. That's why I was hating on the tacos so much, because I was like, these ain't the real tacos. These ain't the delicious ones I miss from home. There's a little spice missing. Or, just kind of like understanding that a lot of again, the subtle things I miss from home. Like I remember, just like, I think music was a huge part of it. I remember playing a lot of just kind of West Coast bangers in this space. And obviously my New York friends have their very strong opinions on hip hop and R&B and whatnot, and like their artists, and I'm just kind of like, uh, uh kind of having those contentious conversations, but also understanding that like, okay, like we are all music lovers. We truly like appreciate also, hip hop, rap, and also this kind of like history as well. So I think that also led to some great friendships and great conversations. Yeah, and I remember having like listening parties with friends when certain albums were released. I remember when the Kendrick Damn album came out, that was kind of like a big time, and just, the amount of hype and also just like conversations around that. I remember when Blonde by Frank Ocean came out. I think that was my sophomore year. That was just like, that was such like a canon event, I guess. I don't know about your relationship with Frank Ocean's Blonde, but that was just a huge moment in my life where I tapped into some kind of like certain emotions and feelings of yearning and whatnot, and also just like also finding other like Frank Ocean fans in like the crowd and being like, oh yes, like these are my people, like you guys get it and you guys understand. So I think, yeah, I think culture and also just like, the arts is a great way to kind of connect with that part of you that you miss either from home, or that, or that you could find in other people as well. So yeah.
Totally. That, and what's kind of coming into my head, what you're describing with different musical tastes and bringing in your 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 passion from like your hometown, wanting to share that. There's like there's a sense that you can like dial in to that like local culture, and that helps ground you and makes you feel like, wow, this is who I am.
Uh,
And then someone else can do the same thing from a different kind of like vantage point or a different artist, right? But you said, but you can always step back and just say, hey, but we're like music lovers, and like we can see things from like a broader perspective. And so I think that's also another kind of dimension to like the whole navigating these different cultures and growing through that experience, is that you're it's almost like, now I'm getting a different, like almost like a scientist looking at a microscope, and you're able to like dial in with like the different lenses, and
mhm,
then like even do like the finer tune of like kind of really focusing on like what's important, but then being able to like dial it back out and like have people understand that like if they're not quite getting it at this level, you can adjust it, if even
mhm,
if they're not able to. And I think that again, that comes with a lot of trial and error, comes with practice, comes with
mhm,
knowing where you came from. I also think that there's incredible generosity to um, being able to like, yeah, focus that for another person, so that they can understand, like just appreciate what exactly you're able to look at, right?
mhm,
It's like kind of doing adjusting the dial for them, right, until it's just right. maybe not always you have the time and patience to do that, but I feel like there's that step in really introducing someone to kind of who you are and being genuine about it, but maybe, yeah, maybe it's not overcompensating with showing exactly the truest, oh, this is what it is, but maybe some version of it. And again, it's a dialogue, it's a dance that we're trying to kind of make sense of each other's realities and have some sense of like common like goodwill that
Yeah.
wow, we can appreciate this from some level.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that's a great place to kind of start kind of wrapping up this conversation, because I think there's so much more that we can
Oh, yeah.
continue to talk about, and I
Oh,
know you
yeah.
have some exciting trips coming up, actually to China, right, to your hometown, and I feel like that's like such a full circle kind of moment for you, before you embark on another exciting journey, which is your PhD studies at UCLA. But yeah, it's just really been such a joy to learn about your journey, and understanding that through these lived experiences, it's helped anchor you as an individual, as a friend, as a son, right, for your family, and also it undoubtedly informs the way with which you do your research. And I think that humanizing research and understanding genuinely the populations that it will serve and benefit, is so important, so that it's not detached, right? In the sense that, like, I think academia has kind of become more and more. So sounds like in a way you're becoming that bridge, um,
Mm.
in the work that you're doing, and the communities that you represent and that you connect with. So last question I have,
Mm.
book recommendation, movie recommendation, any recommendation that you'd like to share to the listeners.
Well, I already mentioned two movies, Sinners and Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's the top for me. But
Oh,
in
you,
terms of
you
book,
gave spoilers to Sinners as
oh,
well.
sorry. If you
That's
haven't
okay.
watched it, where have you been?
I know.
Still winning Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler. Come on now. Anyways, in terms of books, I've been reading Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower. I'm actually reading Parable of the Talents now, but I love science fiction. I love good storytelling. So, and this is also very relevant because this book, in the fictional world, it's set in 2024 and 2025 in LA. And there's a lot of kind of like, themes of power, um, religion, and kind of like, fate and whatnot, and change, and everything. So it's a great read. And I think if you want to understand what's going on in the world, and also just kind of like, also kind of zoom in a little bit on LA specifically, and like the history and the cultures here, I think Parable of the Sower is a great start. So highly recommend reading that book.
Awesome. I'm fascinated. I want to read that book myself, and thank you for that recommendation. And last but not least, I wanted to give you the last word. Any final thoughts or send offs as we wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for talking to me. Let me yap for the past hour or so. Um, and I also just want to say, in terms of like the work that I do, I think to your point about academia, I think to me, my research and my journey is really a love letter to those that got me to where I am today. And hopefully that they, whether it be friends, colleagues, professors, administrators, or folks who just kind of like been in my life and just have been very supportive of my journey. I hope that they are able to look at my research and feel like, oh wow, like he's kind of bringing all these experiences and also these thoughts together that we shared. So yeah, I just want to shout out to everybody who's ever helped your boy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Scott, for bringing me on. Thank you for letting me do this shout out. And yeah, take care, y'all. Until next time.